Well, hello. I'm Bee. Come along with me. Let's talk a little bit about brain science and spiritual warfare and how they're connected. So it's really interesting to me because brain science is a fascinating topic, and I am very interested in brain science because of some trauma that I went through and all of the efforts that I went through for healing that trauma. And the thing that really finally made the biggest difference for me, besides Jesus, is brain science. Understanding the way that our brains work. What happens when we experience trauma and how that reverberates in our bodies and in our minds in the future. So, everybody's heard about post traumatic stress syndrome or PTSD. And So, post traumatic stress disorder is really a disorder, and there's also complex post traumatic stress disorder, which is, it's not in the United States, we don't have it listed in our handbook in our for psychologists, but it's a real thing. And most other countries recognize it, and it's definable. And there are some distinct difference between complex PTSD and PTSD in how the experience that the person has. But the things that are similar between them, what happens when a person goes through trauma? What makes a trauma stick? So everybody has trauma in their life. We all have things that happen to us. There's we fall off our bicycle, we get into a car accident, maybe we break a bone, we go to war, we experience abuse, and all kinds of different things, reasons why a person and how a person experiences trauma. And not all traumas wind up getting kind of stuck in the body, stuck in the mind, and don't bother people in the future. So why is that? Well, one of the reasons why trauma doesn't stick with somebody is because they had an attentive and present caregiver there with them when they experienced the trauma or shortly after. So what really makes a big difference if you have an experience of trauma, something traumatic happening. Let's say you have an accident and you break a bone, and someone is there with you when that happens, or directly after that happens. So you're not alone, okay? And that person is there as a calm presence to remind you that you're going to be okay, that this thing just happened to you and you're probably experiencing a lot of pain. You might be going into shock, but I'm right here with you, and you're going to come out on the other side and be okay, and it's going to be all right. That person is not trying to shut you up. They're not trying to tell you that you can't cry. They're not trying to cover over what's going on. They're just calm and they're present. They're keeping you calm and present. So you don't, sometimes when a person goes into shock or they have a lot of pain or something extreme happens, they might dissociate from the experience. So that's kind of like daydreaming. If you've ever had a daydream and then you kind of shake yourself out of it and you realize, oh, I wasn't even paying attention. I didn't hear anything the teacher said. That's a form of dissociation. You're kind of off in la la land in your own mind somewhere. So that is a built-in mechanism. It is hardwired into us to dissociate when we have traumas. And so that when someone is with you and they're present with you, you're less likely to dissociate. You're more likely to stay present. When someone is saying, I'm here, you can stay focused on their voice, even if part of you is not really present with the pain maybe that you're feeling, but you can be focused on their voice and know that you're not alone. And so oftentimes that will prevent that trauma from becoming PTSD. So then it might become more apparent to you that when you are alone or you're experiencing something extreme, especially war or abuse, or something where maybe a trauma happened, but the person that's with you is gaslighting you and telling you, oh, you're going to be just fine, don't worry about it, shut up. You see the difference in that. Don't cry about it, all that sort of thing, right? Those things can contribute to that trauma really getting anchored in your body because you did not receive the kind of calm, loving, compassionate presence that you needed in a time of extreme stress. And obviously that's going to take place during abuse, that's going to take place during war. And another surprising area where it takes place is in orthopedic surgery. And the reason for that is the body has a way to also shake off the trauma, literally shaking it off. So the body is designed to, when a trauma happens, shortly after the danger has passed or the trauma has passed, the body will start to quiver and shake. And this is a neurological reaction. It's a normal reaction. It's observable in the wild. And what happens when that happens, it probably takes place for maybe from 30 to 60 seconds or so, give or take a little. And then once that quivering is over, then it's gone. That moves the energy of the trauma out of the body. And then you're not carrying that with you any longer. So in orthopedic surgery, when you're coming out of the anesthetic and you're starting to come to, oftentimes the anesthesiologist will give you another type of anesthetic that will stop your body from quivering. And so one of the highest rates of PTSD is actually in people who've had orthopedic surgery. And that would be the reason why, because the body's natural way of shaking off the trauma is being interfered with. So if you think about like when a child falls down and a parent picks that child up and, like in a kind of a panic and is like, you're okay, it's okay, no crying, don't cry, how that is not nurturing at all. It's not calming. It doesn't help a person understand that, sometimes you get hurt and it's normal and natural to get hurt and it's not going to last forever. You'll be okay. To try and shut that crying down and to stop the process of going from one end to the other of this experience, that interruption, that's what causes a trauma to stick in the body. Okay, so that's how we have PTSD or complex PTSD, CPTSD. That's how that works. Okay, so we also have something in the brain. We have these defense mechanisms that are built into the brain. Most people have heard of them: fight, flight, or freeze. There's also a fourth F. It's called fawn. Okay, so when we are confronted with danger, we have hardwired into our brainstem and into our amygdala. These are parts of the brain that are in charge of the instinctual processes of the brain. Okay, they're the earliest formed part of the brain. All of our organs are connected to this part of the brain. It is what we need to survive, and so that's in our brain. And so fight, flight, freeze, and fawn are all kept there. That's where we'll find those responses, those instinctual, sort of animal, automatic responses. We don't even have to think about it at all. It just happens like this. We all have one or two of those responses that we tend to favor. And that usually is based on some kind of early childhood experience that we had where we did that and it worked. So fighting is exactly what it sounds like. Some kind of danger comes and we fight it. Okay. Some kind of danger comes and we run away from it. Some kind of danger comes and we freeze. We play dead. We clam up. We don't say anything. some kind of danger comes and we try to placate the danger. We try to make friends with the danger. We try to get on the side of the danger and keep the peace. Okay? These are all different things that we do instinctually. So you might be thinking of some of that, how you might have done some of these things or a number of these things in your own life. And you might consider, I actually do this more than that, but I have done this or that. When this doesn't work, that's my backup. Everybody's got that, and that's just how it is because we all experience traumatic things. We all experience painful things. We all experience danger in our lives. And so that's how that gets sort of what people might say hardwired right into our brain, or that's our automatic response. That's our defense mechanism. Okay, so we have those ways of responding. So when that part of our brain is working, the other part of our brain, which when we're children hasn't really developed, it's there, it's present, the prefrontal cortex is there, but it has not really developed. It hasn't come online yet, so to speak. So that really we first start to develop it when we're in our early teens. That's when we really start to develop that part of our brain, but it's not really fully developed until we're in our mid to late 20s usually, give or take a little bit, depending on the individual. But that's when we tend to have the full development of our prefrontal cortex. And that part of our brain is really in charge of our ability to think things through step by step. To be able to see, when I do this is going to be the chain reaction, and that's going to be the end result. It's our ability to comprehend that person is acting out of control. I know that's not how they usually are, so I'm just going to, take a step back, or I'm going to, whatever my response is. It's the ability to respond rather than to react. So our amygdala and our brainstem are reaction, automatic, the autonomic nervous system, and our prefrontal cortex is our ability to think things through, to have logic, to have compassion, to understand the results of our actions, to know, how our reactions are going, how our actions are going to affect others. And so that's our response. We have reaction and response. Another way to think about this, and that oftentimes is discussed, is that our mammalian brain is this part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, and our reptilian brain is the brainstem and the older parts of the brain. They're often referred to as reptilian brain, which, if we're thinking in a Christian context, is very apt. Okay, so our reptilian brain. These two parts of our brain cannot operate at the same time. We cannot be in an automatic reactive state and also be thinking things through logically. We cannot be in an automatic reactive state and be having compassion for someone else. When we are in survival mode, the only thing we're thinking about is getting ourselves out of danger, and it's on automatic. It's not even really something that we should even consider to be thought, as we know thought to be. It is automatic, okay? It's thought in the same way that persistent thoughts are thought. Those persistent thoughts that you have, those self-critical thoughts that might come in, that just sort of seem to just always be there, that oftentimes we think of as spiritual warfare, that's reptilian brain, okay? It's not really thought. It's not conscious thought. It's not intentional thought. It's just something that's just existing and sometimes takes over, and we feel helpless when that happens. And when you hear the word trigger, which has kind of become a very, a word that's really common in pop culture, But it is a psychological term. It's a term that was coined in the field of psychology, and it is referring specifically to people who have trauma, and especially PTSD, people who have post-traumatic stress and are and they're living in a disordered way in reaction to that. They don't know how to manage that stress. It's out of control in their lives, and so they're constantly reacting. That's why people have things like flashbacks. That's a flashback is a trigger. So a trigger is a reaction of the reptilian brain to some kind of stimuli that reminds the reptilian brain of the original traumatic incident. Okay, so it doesn't have to consciously make any sense. It doesn't have to logically make any sense. It can be a smell, maybe the smell of sulfur, for example, for someone who was in war, or the sound of fireworks. That's a great example. Someone who's been in war oftentimes will have a reaction, a trigger to fireworks, right? So then they avoid fireworks. Or maybe rather than avoiding fireworks, maybe they have a psychological break, right? And they react like they're in war. Maybe they go hide under the bed. Maybe they fight, and maybe they get out their gun and they start shooting at people. Maybe, they freeze, maybe they run away, right? So these are all different reactions that are hardwired into the reptilian brain that happen as a result of some kind of stimuli that activates or triggers the reptilian brain to respond. Sometimes it's a smell, sometimes it's a sight, sometimes, it's like going past a certain neighborhood where something happened, or maybe it's the sound of somebody's voice, or maybe it's words that somebody is using, or the tone of their voice, or like I said, maybe it's some kind of a smell. Maybe if you were abused and your abuser wore a certain perfume or a certain cologne, maybe that will set off a trigger. Maybe it's, just for any reason. Maybe it's the weather, or the time of day, or the time of year. All of these different things can be triggers. Maybe it's a certain type of relationship. All of these things can activate the reptilian brain. The response is differently. So, like classic PTSD, that's when you hear about people having like a flashback and they're behaving as if they're back in that moment. And what's happening for them is they're having basically like a replay of the moment. So they're really not with you in the present time. They're in the past. Okay. Whereas CPTSD is something where someone, they don't have the same type of flashback. It's more of an emotional flashback. It's more of an energetic flashback, so to speak, where their emotional response is as if they are back in the moment, but they're not having visual flashbacks. They're not having audio flashbacks. It's more vague. It's like a vague feeling, something is reminding the reptilian brain of something that happened a long time ago, and that person is having an emotional response to that. And oftentimes that can last for a longer period of time. It can result in the body will store up those memories and manifest different illnesses as a result. Digestive issues are really common. Autoimmune disorders are really common among people who have complex PTSD, because the body remembers. There's this great book, it's called Body Keeps the Score, by Bessel van der Kolk, and he really outlines the brain science and really goes deep into it. If you're a super nerd, you might enjoy that. If you have a lot of trauma from your childhood, I don't read that without having some kind of therapeutic support, because it can really activate your brain quite a bit. So you might be kind of as I'm talking, thinking to yourself, oh, yeah, I can see how the enemy would use this in spiritual warfare to come against someone, right? And that's really true. So also another way complex trauma can show up, like the symptoms can show up as like a brain fog, the inability to concentrate, ADHD, and you know, it can also show up as like vacillating emotions. There's a lot of people who get misdiagnosed with other mental health disorders that really just have complex PTSD. So it can show up like a bipolar disorder, or like BPD, which is borderline personality disorder. It sometimes can mimic narcissistic personality disorder. Oftentimes people with CPTSD, because it tends to happen more to people who have childhood trauma, but it can happen with people who've had multiple big T traumas, like maybe domestic violence and a major car accident and orthopedic surgery. Those things combined can result in a complex PTSD, but it's most common in people who have a childhood that has a series of traumas, but it can happen to adults as well. Let's see, I want to make sure I'm getting back on track here. So yeah, so it can show up like different emotional disorders. Also, it can result in attachment disorders. So attachment theory is really about how we attach to our main caregivers as children. So that from birth to 5 years old is the most important part of a child's life, of development, of a person's development, any human's development. Those are the key years. So those are the years that we really want to make sure that, so if you're a new parent, really take this to heart. Those are the years that you really want to show up for your children, and you want to have a lot of high emotional intelligence, and you want to tend to your child's needs. So when they're crying, you got to respond to them. You got to respond to a crying child. Children are not mini adults, okay? Children do not cry to manipulate adults. Children learn to cry about different things because the adult will respond to crying. That's their way of communicating, because they don't have words yet, okay? So when a child cries, you want to respond to them and see what happens. And then they know that you will respond to them when they're crying. So when they're hungry, they will cry. When they need their diaper changed, they will cry. When they need something, they just need to be close to their parent, they will cry. Children need to be close to their parents. They need to have contact with their parents. That's very important for the first 5 years of life, to have close contact and to have a nurturing, loving caregiver in their life, preferably two. God created us for a reason in this way. And to not be chastised for crying. So it's really, really important. So when a child falls down, that you respond, and not that you respond, you overreact, but that you respond in a calm and nurturing manner, that you are always bringing a calm and nurturing manner to your children. And that can be really hard if you have your own childhood trauma. Oftentimes our children will actually trigger us or activate our reptilian brain, especially when they reach certain points of development in their childhood where we might have experienced a major trauma. So if you're going through that, please do consult with a therapist. Find someone who really does. Good therapists to look for are therapists who use dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT for short. Cognitive behavioral therapy can be really, really helpful as well. Those are a couple of really great forms of therapy to get you rolling, to get you started. Talk therapy doesn't really work great for trauma, especially if you have any kind of disordered thinking around it. So if you have PTSD or you suspect you might have PTSD, um, talk therapy doesn't really do any good. It's just regurgitating the trauma over and over again, and it can actually be re-traumatizing, especially if you're trying to tell your story. There are some therapists out there who think that telling your story and confronting it is how you deal with trauma, but that's not how you deal with trauma. It does not work. And it can actually cause further trauma, re-traumatization. Um, so find someone who can do DBT, and you'll be on a good path. And so art therapy is also really helpful, because it accesses a different part of the brain, and that the part of the brain that art therapy accesses is more related to the way that memory works. So you have a narrative memory, okay, and that's the part that tells the story. And then I'm spacing on the word for it right now. You have another kind of memory that relates to sort of like the feeling and the bodily sensations and all of that. So that's a different type of memory, and it's stored in different areas of the body. And in fact, we have brain cells throughout our body, and especially not just our brain, but our hearts and our stomachs, which is why how they've discovered that we store, when we have a lot of trauma, we tend to have digestive issues, or maybe heart attacks. But I'm getting a little bit off track. This is one of my favorite topics of all time, and I've spent a lot of years studying this, and also treating people. I do healing body work and massage and body work, and also personal coaching, and so I've done a lot to help people move through some pretty stagnant and entrenched trauma. And so I just love this topic so much. But the main thing I want to be talking about is about how the two parts of the brain cannot interact at the same time. They can't be active at the same time. So if you think about it, like when they scan the brain, what they have found is that because our brains are filled with electricity, so when they scan the brain, when you're thinking with your prefrontal cortex and you're engaging that part of your brain, it's lit. It's all lit up, okay, on the scan. But what happens when you get triggered? That part of your brain goes dark, okay? So think about it that way, light and dark, okay? Reptilian, and you can think of this as more like the seat of Christ. The seat of Christ, the mind of Christ, is in the prefrontal cortex, okay? The mind of the enemy is in the reptilian brain, okay? So you've got the reptilian and the seat of Christ, okay? So think about it that way. Now, one of the techniques that I learned and have used and have taught is this very, very simple, easy technique used that to be able to bring your prefrontal cortex back online, to light up the seat of Christ, okay? And the way to do that is by stopping and taking 3 long, slow breaths. We'll just say 1 for the Father, 1 for the Son, and 1 for the Holy Ghost, okay? Long and slow. So I'm going to demonstrate, and I'm just going to ask you to try it with me right now, okay? So let's just do it together. So breathing in. And breathing out, super slow. Breathing in. And breathing out, super slow. One more. Breathing in. Now, if you really did that, you might feel really calm right now. You might feel really present right now, because that's how that part of our nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, operates. Okay, the seed of Christ is lit up. Okay, the reptilian brain is being quiet. It's been soothed and calmed down. That beast has been serenaded and is chilling out, sleeping. Okay, it's the only thing that part of our brain is worried about right now is keeping our heart beating and our lungs moving, our blood pumping, and all of that type of stuff. Okay, and we can use our mind, the mind of Christ, our sound mind, to discern, to do whatever it is that we wish to do in this moment. We can respond rather than react. We can respond to whatever comes before us when this part of our brain is lit up, the mind of Christ. Okay? So, okay, but if we haven't practiced that, and we're faced with something, we're confronted with something that triggers us, or we're confronted with something that's really extreme and difficult, we're likely for this part of our brain to just shut off and our reptilian brain to click on and take over and take charge. Now, that's really not the part of our brain we want to take charge in most moments. We don't really live in a world where we're being chased by lions. So that the way that our brains operate has not really evolved as quickly as the rest of us has evolved, as quickly as the world around us has evolved. Okay, and so, and just take that word with a grain of salt. I'm not suggesting that evolution theory is the way that everything runs. Actually, that's been debunked, but there is some level of evolution that does take place. But just for ease of flow of conversation, that part of our brain has not caught up with the rest of the world. Okay, and we're not living in caves. We're not living out in the wild. We're living in warm homes, most of us. We're not being chased by lions. We're not being continuously confronted by dangerous threats to our survival. We don't have to face that. Most people don't have to face that anymore. And so it's an outsized reaction to a perceived threat when our reptilian brain takes charge. And that's not really we don't want that one in charge, because it is not wise. It's not going to make a wise choice. Reactivity, being hyper reactive, is not a wise choice. And we can see in the world around us, we can look in the world around us, in the culture around us, how prevalent it is for people to be in the reptilian brain, just reacting automatically out of things and not using wisdom. Okay, so we want to have the mind of Christ. So how do we do that? If something just automatically takes us out of that calmness, how do we get it back? It's really hard to get it back once we're in the reptilian brain. Have you ever been in a moment in your life where just like everything that could go wrong is going wrong, and you're desperate, and you just cannot stop thinking about how desperate you are, the things that you're afraid of, the worries that you have? Maybe there's someone out there that you love that's in a hard place and they're just not changing, and you just really desperately want them to be okay, and you're just pleading with God about it, or you're just worrying all the time about them, and you can't change your thinking about it. You can't get calm about it. or maybe you just have a tendency for anxiety, or you know, maybe you've experienced depression or extreme grief, right? The kind of grief that the Lord needs to shake you out of and say, okay, it's time to walk away from this grief, right? That just feels like it's stuck forever, and you can't, you're just stuck in it, you know, you're just mired in it, and every day you wake up and you just feel depressed and you feel blue and you feel sad and you just can't shake it off. That's the reptilian brain, okay? And it can really overwhelm a person for long periods of time. So it's not only an automatic acute response, but it's also can be a long-term response. And oftentimes that's a learned response. So if you have a tendency toward depression or toward anxiety, or you suspect you might have complex PTSD, or even PTSD, then you might get stuck in these patterns for longer periods of time. It could be weeks on end that you're just kind of like in a brain fog. You can't really think straight. You're just sort of like, the world feels gray and boring, right? And even in the case of acute PTSD or acute moments, you can't get out of that reactivity, okay? You just have to wait for it to pass, right? There's a trick you can do. So these long, slow breaths, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, nice long period of time. When you do these long, slow breaths, just like we just did, regularly. So what I tell people is put it in your phone, set a timer every 90 minutes for at least a month, but shoot for 3 months, okay? Every 90 minutes for 3 months, 3 long, slow breaths, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Practice this. And when you do it that long, it will become more habitual. It will begin to overtake the other habits that you have, okay? So let's talk about this. Here's another little bit about brain science, okay? So let's talk about bad habits, right? Let's say you have a bad habit, and you want to change it, okay? It could be anything. It doesn't have to be a big bad habit, but it can be. Doesn't matter. It could be heroin. It could be cigarettes. It could be coffee. It could be complaining. It could be nitpicking. It could be junk food. It could be not getting to bed on time. Whatever it is for you, doesn't matter. It could be, maybe you swear, maybe, maybe you're trying to change the way you talk, it doesn't matter what it is. Maybe, you're lazy and you don't exercise. Doesn't matter, whatever it is, whatever that bad habit is, okay? It's the same for the reptilian brain, the automatic reaction that we get, that we've got pattern into our brain. How do those patterns happen in our brain? They are patterns. They are in our brain. Hardwiring is a way to think about it. So the way that neural pathways work, okay? A neural pathway is the way that a message travels from one neuron, that's a nerve cell, to another nerve cell inside of our brain or in our body. We have them all over. And so that message, that it's an electrical charge, it gets sent from one to another, okay? And that's a pathway, okay? So pathways grow stronger, okay, with time and repetition. So the way I like to think about it is like dropping water on a stone. When you drop water on a stone long enough, you're going to create a little rivulet in that stone, okay? So that's what our bad habits are. Any habits, really, are that. But we're just thinking about bad habits. So our bad habits, our reactivity, our reptilian brain, we've been dropping that one drop in the same place repeatedly for decades. I'm 55 years old, so most of my habits I've been repeating for, 55 years. You know, maybe a little bit less than that. So I've been doing that for a long time. Okay. So maybe 45 years. Maybe some only 35 years. Just depending. So then we want to change that habit. We want a new habit. We want to do the 3 breaths. We want to turn on our mind of Christ instead of our reptilian brain. Okay? So we're trying to get out of the sinful habits and into the righteous habits. Okay? So to do that, we need to create a new habit. How do we do that? We got to drop water. Okay, where's that water going to go? Well, for a while, it's going to keep going back into that main rivulet, right? We're dropping the water in a different place, but it's going to keep flowing into that same rivulet, right? Until it's dropped on this one place long enough to create a new narrow pathway. And that's when we start to see change, okay? So, but we have to be consistent with it. We can't give up. Okay, that's why we must persist in prayer. That's why we must knock and keep on knocking. That's why we must seek and keep on seeking. Right? That's why we must ask and keep on asking. Because we are dropping our water in a new place, and we have to do it long enough to create a new narrow pathway, a new rivulet. Okay? That's how that works. And once we do that long enough in the new place, the water will divert to that new narrow pathway, and it will grow stronger than the old one. Okay? So that's neurologically how we change our habits. Okay? So now, let's apply that to our enemy, the enemy of our soul. Okay? How many times when you are under attack by the enemy of your soul, when Satan is attacking your thoughts, he's attacking your family, he's attacking your finances, your work, whatever you got going on, do you turn your attention to the enemy and start fighting the enemy, right? You start to get into a battle with the enemy. I'm fighting the enemy. Or maybe you don't do that. Maybe what you do instead is you try to numb out and you just, for me right now, my biggest vice is watching tiny house videos. When I just feel like I feel overwhelmed. So, but maybe for you it's something else. Maybe for you it's, smoking or falling back into sin, that avoidance. You're trying to avoid, you're trying to escape, you're trying to run away from it, flight. Or maybe you just shut down, and also falling into sin could be seen as a form of fawning, right? You're just trying to keep an even keel, when I was doing that one thing where Satan has dominion, he wasn't fighting me so hard, so maybe I'll go back to that, right? So, but a lot of times when we're really, 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 really committed to Jesus, what we'll try and do is we'll fight. And there's, fighting can be good. It's good to fight. It's good to feel, to know your strength, to test your mettle, to do that. But there also comes a time when you need to stop giving him so much attention. And this is also biblical. So in Philippians 4:8, I believe it is 4:8, to place your minds on what is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, and admirable, as well as anything that is excellent and or, I can't read my own writing here. Praiseworthy. Excellent or praiseworthy. Okay, so Paul is telling us right there. And really what he's talking about is moving out of the reptilian brain into the seat of Christ. Okay? Because when we are in a state of gratitude, gratitude is like kryptonite to complaining. Okay? Complaining, gratitude. Okay? Gratitude is a drop of water on a different area. We're creating a new neural pathway when we are practicing praise and gratitude. When we turn away, right? That's a real metanoia, right? We're turning away from the enemy, from all the enemy's distractions, diversions, and attacks, trusting entirely in God, right? Knowing that God has got us. And so we don't actually have to fight that fight because God has already done it. So let's just put our attention on the Lord. Let's praise the Lord. Let's give thanks for what is praiseworthy. What around us is worthy of gratitude right now. And it can be the smallest things. You know, my pajamas are comfortable. You know, the sun is shining. I know a lot of people will say, I woke up and I have breath today. That's true. That's true. It might be sometimes hard to give thanks for that if you're really in a hard, funky place, but you might be able to appreciate the sun that's shining through your window a little bit more. Or maybe birdsong. The small things that bring comfort to you. You start there and build and keep building and force yourself to do it. You know, sometimes you just have to force yourself to do it. Sometimes you're giving thanks and you don't want to and you feel grumpy. And you're like, this is no good. Do it anyway. There's another practice that I've done in the past of just laughing. And it's the same kind of thing where you have to start laughing. You kind of force yourself to laugh. And then eventually it becomes absurd that you're forcing yourself to laugh and you're grumpy. And then you start to laugh for real. And you have to commit to doing it for a certain amount of time. Laugh for 10 minutes. Try it. Laugh for 5 minutes. Try it. See what happens. Heck, even try laughing for 1 minute. See what happens. If you try to force yourself to laugh for 1 minute. First thing in the morning. Do it first thing in the morning. So all these things are things that you can do to help cultivate new neural pathways in your brain. And it also takes your attention off what the devil is doing and puts it on God. It's totally biblical. Okay, so God has given us the recipe to change our neural pathways in our brain. Okay, and let me see. Let's see here. I'm just kind of looking over my notes. I want to make sure I get you everything I wanted to tell you today. And I want you to get it all. So basically what we're doing when we're doing that is we are closing the door to the attacks of the devil. And we're just shutting it down. We're like, we're not giving the devil any attention. The devil is the original narcissist, and the best way to combat narcissistic abuse is to do what is called gray rock. Don't give it any attention. Do not react to it. So you've got to develop your responsiveness in order to avoid being reactive, okay? And then you have to know, I'm not actually gonna respond to this. That is a response. Choosing not to respond. Choosing to ignore. Going gray rock. That's the best defense you have against the devil. So you're just focusing your attention on the Lord. You're turning your heart to God. Metanoia. Changing your mind. And here's the other thing. While you're doing that, you're developing those sort of like mental muscles. You're going to fall down. You're going to fail. It's going to happen. So that water's going to get diverted into the wrong area, and you're going to go down that rabbit hole. You're going to get reactive, but it'll be different because you'll notice it. as opposed to like first you have the period where you don't notice it and you're learning about it. Now that you've heard about it, you'll start to notice it more. And then upon noticing it more, you'll start to you'll begin to start to try and make changes. And for a while that's going to be really hard, and you're going to fall and fail. And then after so long, that water's going to drop in the right place and you're going to have some success. But when you fall and fail, it's okay, because God also told us that in Proverbs 24:16, for a righteous man may fall 7 times, he will rise again, right? But the wicked shall fall by calamity. So don't allow calamity to take over you, okay? Get up again. It's okay. Brush yourself off. It's all right. No big deal. No big deal. Everybody does it. This is part of being human, okay? And let's see. Also, I just want to say, because oftentimes these attacks come through the people around us, sometimes it's the people closest to us that we love the most, and it can be really difficult, you know, because the devil will use anything and anyone, even people who don't, you know, they themselves aren't doing anything. It's just something they're saying or doing that's really irritating you, and the devil will make you focus on that. And so just remember that it's not the personality, it's the principality. And you know, and just remind yourself, Jesus said it himself, right? Forgive them, Lord, they know not what they do. Just remember that they know not what they do. And also Matthew 18:22, that states and tells us that Jesus also taught that as many times as others fail us or sin against us, that we should continue to forgive. That's where he says, forgive 7 times 70. He's telling us to continuously forgive, to not stop forgiving, to do not give up, right? So, and forgive really means to grant, to allow, to remit, and also the Proto-Indo-European root of the word forgive means completely give or receive. So right there is the little message for us, that forgiveness is really for us. I know you've probably heard this before, and it sounds terrible, because how can we forgive people who are hurting us? Well, we forgive them because they know not what they do. It's the principality, not the personality. And we know that it is a gift for us to receive. When we forgive others, we are also forgiven by the Lord. We are turning away from the trigger. We are turning away from the devil. We are turning away from sin, and we are turning to God. We are having a metanoia. We are focusing on what is good and what is God-given. We are letting go of all the things that activate our reptilian brain, the devil inside of us, and we are turning and receiving the mind of Christ. The Lord made a way where there seems to be no way. He made it. He made this whole thing. He designed us like this. So make use of it. I hope this blesses you. Please do comment and share anything, any questions, anything you would like to share. Please like this video and subscribe and tell your friends. And let me know if there's anything else you would like to talk about or discuss for next time. All right. God bless you.